Those of you that have been traveling with me for a long time, you may be surprised at my new costume. I'm chairman of the board of the Seva Foundation, and this is as straight as I could get. This is take it off, it's the same schnook it always was. Oh boy, it's such fun to play all these games. It all seems real for a moment. What I usually do, and I don't assume this will be any different, is share notes of what's been happening. I always talk about myself, it turns out, but those of you that know that it isn't really me, it's us. And I just use myself as a case study that I know better than I know everybody else's case study. Because what awes me is how parallel our journeys are. And how much, when I'm going through something and I think, boy, this is really leading edge stuff, I meet somebody and they say, gee, that's just what's been happening to me. Just to put you at ease with an old familiar story about that one. You recall that story about when in the 70s, when everybody came and they all wore white and smiled a lot, and they were all between 15 and 25? That was who the audience was in those days. And if you remember the story about that in the front row, there was one woman sitting there who was about 70, and she was wearing a hat with little strawberries and cherries on it, artificial. And she was wearing a print dress and black Oxfords, responsible Oxfords. And she had a black patent leather bag. And I thought, she's obviously somebody's relative. Because everybody else was very different than she was. So I started to talk for the group, and in those days we all knew. You know, that was in the 60s and 70s, we all knew. And everybody didn't know, but we knew. And many of us knew because we had shared initiation rites, chemical or otherwise, mostly chemical. So I would tell a story about what happened to me, and everybody would nod, and I'd look over and she was nodding. And I thought, how does she know? So I told a further out story, like the last time I was stoned on the beach in Mexico and standing by the ocean, and I lost my body and the thread broke, and she's going like this, you know. And I figure, maybe she's got a neck problem, you know. And I got absolutely obsessed with what was happening in her consciousness. And so I'd tell far out things and look to see what she was doing. And at the end of the lecture, I kind of looked at her and smiled and smiled. And finally she came up to me. And she said, oh, I just want you to know, what you said was just fine. I agreed with everything you said. How did you know? What is it you've done that you can know these things? And she leaned forward very conspiratorially and she said, I crochet. That's when I knew that the game was bigger than I thought it was.